So it is now 7.
Now 7, and I would like to call August 2020 Hermiston Planning Commission meeting to order. First piece of business is to introduce a new commissioner, Mr. Josh Burns, sitting next to me. I've known Josh for a few years, shortly after he came to town. I'll let him kind of give us a little bio. He didn't give me one.
Thanks, Dean. My family and I moved here from Arkansas 9 years ago. How's that? Hey, thank you. My family and I moved here from Arkansas 9 years ago. Prior to about 3 months ago, I was the general manager at the Walmart Distribution Center. Now I am a commercial insurance broker for Swanson Insurance Group. We decided about 3 years ago this was going to be home for us. We love the area, we love the community, and with that, I felt like I ought to be involved more at the local government level. This presented a wonderful opportunity to do that, so I'm thrilled to be a part of the Planning Commission. Thank you.
I know I'm pleased that you are a part of the Planning Commission too, so I look forward to many meetings with you. Next item of business is approval of the minutes of the July 8th meeting. We have a motion to approve.
Second. Second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed, same sign. Motion passes. First item on tonight's agenda is the continuation of the public hearing that was started last month. The record was left open, and I will refrain from reading the introduction, legal introduction. Now, did you hear me? I can. Okay. So as I was saying, the first item on the agenda is continuation of the public hearing for the zoning amendment for the light industrial lands. I'm going to refrain from reading the introduction to the public hearing because it is a continuation unless somebody would object to that. We have had additional information given to us in the staff report and tonight. I hope everybody has had a chance to look at least a little bit of it. But first, I would like, Clint, would you like to do a staff report, please?
Everybody okay? Can you hear me? Oh, perfect. Okay, yeah, tonight we're doing a continuation of our July 8th hearing. It's a hearing strictly on the text amendment to the zoning ordinance to accommodate temporary emergency shelters, but not on any specific development proposal. The Planning Commission at the July meeting requested staff to perform some additional research before they would close the hearing and make a recommendation to the City Council. And in addition to the additional research that we as staff performed, two of the planning commissioners made a visit, I guess, to the shelter that's operated in Walla Walla, and they will be reporting back as part of their just general discussion at the Planning Commission. The staff report that you have contains most of the information that was requested by the Planning Commission, but unfortunately some of the items that the Planning Commission wanted simply don't exist unless an actual study is commissioned. Much of the July discussion centered on the spacing requirements and the potential of adding an additional spacing requirement from preschools and from city parks. There are 3 maps that are included in your staff report that detail how adding in a 1,000-foot separation from parks and a 1,000-foot separation from preschools would affect the overall buildable land supply and how that cumulatively affects the available land in the light industrial zone. Including a park separation requirement leaves very little potential area to accommodate shelters. And if a park requirement is something that the Planning Commission wishes to include in their recommendation to the City Council, you may also want to consider adding the shelter as a use that's permitted in the M2 zone, as that would permit much more available buildable land. Our M2 zone is limited entirely to the southeast corner of the city along the Peatville Road frontage between 395 and Peatville Road. In that triangle, that's all M2 down there. That would add about another 700 acres or so that would meet the spacing requirement. One of the things that was requested was how homeless shelters and emergency shelters might affect calls for service and how the police department would be responding for those. Our police department reached out to the Walla Walla PD to discuss how calls for service are impacted around the one in Walla Walla. And what they found is that the shelter as it operates has not seen what they termed an abnormal increase in calls for service. It's consistent with the number that you would expect in the area that it's located, and that calls for service citywide declined slightly once the shelter was built because there was a place that a lot of their incidents would then be concentrated so that incidents weren't in other places in the city. Sex offenders was another issue that was requested to research, and they're generally prohibited from living near parks, and they are required to self-report their location on a monthly basis. So whether or not there is a zoning code exclusion for parks, all Oregon state laws regarding parole, probation, and court monitoring will still apply. There was one study on property values near shelters that I was able to locate. It found that shelters can create a negative pressure on real estate value of about 6 to 7%, depending on distance from a shelter. Generally, that impact dissipates at about more than 1,000 feet. And that study was done in the boroughs of New York, where there are shelters spaced all over the city and have a lot of residential neighborhoods and things that might be in close proximity. Similarly, crime does increase near shelters. A study in Vancouver, British Columbia, found an increase in property crimes of up to 56% within 400 meters of a shelter. That was the only comprehensive study I was able to find that looked at crime rates, but that is the evidence that's out there. I could not find any concrete evidence if construction of a shelter increases the homeless population in a city. There were things that I was able to find that showed sometimes it goes up, and in some places, like Salt Lake City, it actually went down after a shelter was constructed. So I cannot find anything concrete around that. The best I can say is that the Census Bureau will enumerate a point-in-time count of the homeless population here in Hermiston. They were supposed to have done that on March 1st. I'm not sure what the status is of that with all of the COVID-related things, but that will give us a baseline to look at in the future for how any population would increase or decrease. You have quite a bit of additional testimony that has been submitted to the city since the Planning Commission last met. All of the collected testimony that we received is in your packet. There's additionally more testimony that came in, even since we prepared the packet last week, just today, additional testimony came in from Lambert, Semiotis, and Beloit. And so you have all of that. There's no change to the draft ordinance that was presented in your staff report in July. As I said, any changes that you might want to discuss would be adding separation requirements from preschools, adding separation requirements from parks, potentially adding the M2 zone as a potential area, as well as the M1. Additionally, there's no changes to the draft findings that were in your staff report in July. The only thing that I changed is that some of the meeting dates in the findings of when the Planning Commission and City Council will have met have been changed to reflect the extended time. And just as an aside, I do want to point out that the word data is plural and not singular, and it was in the staff report listed as singular. So I do know that datum is the singular version.
want to share anything from your trip to Walla Walla?
I can, sure. I don't know, Jim, what you wanted to talk about from this, so I don't want to kind of like duplicate things, but, so I did go, Jim and I went on this, kind of, sightseeing excursion, and, I was impressed with the facility. It's on Reese Avenue, kind of in sort of northern Walla Walla, across the street from the state penitentiary. It's in a pretty industrial zone. I would say a kind of a little rougher industrial zone, maybe, with I think unpaved streets out there, if I'm remembering right. But the facility is nice. It's well maintained. They have a full-time security guard that is there, at least is there when they have residents in the facility. But lately, because of COVID, I think they have residents all the time. They're kind of a 24-hour operation. So I think they have round-the-clock security at that place. There was some discussion about the positives and negatives of ownership of the facility property. The Boise versus Martin case was talked about a little bit, and one of the, I guess, I haven't read that case, I'm not familiar with it, but the point that I took away from what they communicated to us was that if a city has an anti-camping ordinance for public parks, they have to provide alternative public property for homeless people. And so having this facility owned by the city satisfies that requirement, which means Walla Walla can have an anti-camping ordinance in their parks. They don't know if they do, but they can. If this property were in private ownership, my understanding was that wouldn't be the same result. So there are trade-offs. The fellow who kind of coordinated the tour, whose name I cannot remember right now, said there are some trade-offs in having this property owned by the city versus private ownership. There's some different rules about searching people. You know, you can't search without probable cause if you're a government institution, and so they can't just do bag checks or whatever that they might be able to do if they were in private ownership. But there are benefits to funding benefits and other things. One thing that I asked him about specifically was what he thought about being near a park. He said, actually wrote down what he said, but he said that would be a problem, was his comment, and recommended against it. My impression was that really that mainly had to do with kind of trying to kind of cut off any tension with the community. There had been some issues in Walla Walla with park usage and people in the community upset about having homeless folks in the parks and not feeling like they could use the parks adequately. So he thought that it would be better to not have a facility next to a park. They are a facility, I can't remember the name for it, but they basically don't turn anybody away. So if they don't require you to be clean and sober, or there is, it's pretty much open to anyone. And because of that, they don't allow kids there. They don't. He said this is not a place for kids. So I think depending on what kind of facility or shelter you're operating, that might change. But his view was that it was better to have kids separated from this area. He did say they see very little violence there. What there tends to be arguments between the residents and sometimes the domestic couples that are there. those are, I guess, the main things that I made notes of. I thought the place was actually very tidy. It was, the neighborhood even was, for an industrial neighborhood, a normal-looking industrial neighborhood, I thought. I was impressed with the facility. I had not actually been thinking about the presence of security before, but I think that might be something that would make sense to have or provide for. That's, I guess that's about it for me.
Thank you, Derek. Jim, you want to share some thoughts?
Yeah, it was everybody hearing me okay? Pretty beneficial visit. I kind of focused in on a couple different things, mainly on the security of the location and their relationships with the surrounding business owners. From what I could determine, that they have pretty good relationships with most of the other businesses. But on the other hand, the businesses were quite a distance away from the facility itself. They do have a security camera in the compound, and like Derek mentioned, they do have a security officer that's there during the evening and through the night to maintain security in the inside the compound. There really isn't any security on the outside of the compound, so. They said that the police were pretty supportive of the location out there. And again, like Derek mentioned, that is kind of isolated out there. There's not too much opportunity for folks to get into mischief out there other than creating their own. And it took them about 5 years to get this. Who am I competing with?
All participants are on hold.
Anyway,
This line is now on hold.
thought maybe it was an intermission or something. Don't tell me to shut up. Anyway, looks like they have about $130,000 a year in various grants and money's coming in. They do have a mobile shower that they have to use out there. They have porta potties, and they do have some indoor facilities like laundry services and whatnot. It's a pretty good operation, but it did take them 5 years to get where they're at. So I was impressed with the operation out there. I like the distance that they had from residential areas and populated areas where it could create a problem. So I guess that's about all I observed out there, in addition to what Derek came up with.
All righty, thank you, Jim. I want to thank you both again for taking the time to visit Walla.
Hey, Dean, could I add one more thing?
You can.
I forgot to mention this, but one other question we asked was what kind of percentage of their residents there were local folks versus from out of town, from out of the area. He said up to last year, 85% of the residents were from kind of the local community, which he included Walla Walla County, Umatilla County. He said that percentage has decreased this year, so it's less than 85%. He didn't give a percentage, but he said part of that is due to the facility's success in finding homes for local people. And so increasing number of the local people that were residents there at the homeless shelter now have all their places to live, and so that percentage has gone down.
That was a good question. Thank you. Okay, now, I'd like to continue testimony. I would like to do the same format that we normally do in continuing our testimony. In other words, first we'll have proponents come up and talk, then we'll have anybody who is against this proposal, and then we'll let the proponents have a rebuttal time. I would ask that you let me know, be recognized by the chair, come up to the microphone, state your name and address for the record, we need that for our record, and then give your testimony. After you're done, please take a wipe and clean off the microphone and any of the surfaces that you might have touched on the dais there, so that we be respectful to our colleagues here tonight. So, proponents, who would like to, Kathy, do you want to start off? Okay.
My name is Sandy Francis. I don't put the I'm Sandy Francis, 33627 Stagecoach Road. I am the chairman of the Hermiston Mormon Station. It feels like every time we come here, it's an uphill battle. And we do hear the negatives, and we understand the negatives, we research the negatives, we go to the park, we sit at the park, we don't go into this blindly. We also leave here feeling a little bit defeated, but we get together, and as a group, we're like, but is this worth fighting for? Is this something that we want to come back and keep getting beat up over? Absolutely it is. Absolutely, because we believe in it passionately. I hear a lot of theys and thems, and when you let them out of the stepping stones, they have names, and they also have faces. And I've been at the Hermiston Mormon Station for a few years, and I just want to give you a couple of examples. It won't take too much of your time, but we focus so much on the drug addicts, the alcoholics, the fighting, how dirty they are. But I want to give you just a couple of examples of what we have. The first one that I had was a young girl showed up almost at closing time, very scared, very terrified. And we took her into the women's room, and she hadn't ate for 3 days. When she turned 18 years old, she was kicked out. This is in the middle of winter, and she had been living on the streets. No family, nowhere to go, no food, nothing. The Hermiston Mormon Station was able to bring her in, give her some food, give her a little bit of hope, something she hadn't had for 3 days. Not a drug addict. She was clean. Well, you're part of her battle. Another one is a mother that came in. I never asked her story. She was there every single night with her teenage son, every single night. He didn't mingle with everybody. They went to a room, but the family room, which children are allowed, the family room by themselves. One night she asked me to help him fill out some paperwork because she, I don't know that she was illiterate, but she wasn't comfortable filling out paperwork. This was a kid that had a 4.0 GPA in Pendleton. Every day she would get up in the morning, take her son to Pilot, give him a shower, clean clothes, drive him to Pendleton, and he would go to school all day long. Nobody knew he was homeless. Nobody knew any of this because this is what this mother did. She worked, temporary jobs to get them money to bathe him, wash his clothes, to do all of these things for him. He was getting a scholarship. That was the paperwork that she was wanting me to help fill out. That was a mom dedicated to helping her son, and the Hermiston Mormon Station was able to help her do that for him. Again, I don't believe she was on drugs. I think she was a mom that was trying to get a home, could not afford, if she could find an apartment, the first and last month's rent with the education that she had. But it was a woman who wanted to provide for her son. And also, this last one touches a little bit closer to home, actually very close to home. A mom, 3 small children, living in and out of cars, nowhere to go. This is back in the 70s. Nowhere to go. No drug counseling. No help for this woman. Lost 3 children, foster care system. She couldn't get a home. Couldn't get, I am that child. My brothers are those children. Don't count us out. Yes, we were homeless. Yes, we didn't have the best upbringing, but don't count us out. We're productive members of the society. And in Hermiston, my brother owns a heating and air company here. My other brother's an engineer. Being homeless doesn't count you out. And so we are willing to fight this battle as long as we have to get this done. And we hope that you'll support us in this. That's kind of pretty much all I had to say, but these are people that are lost. Not all of them want to be helped, not all of them want to be found, but it's our job to help people that are lost get the help they need. And at Stepping Stones, that is what we're trying to do. And so we'd love your support. Thank you.
Thank you. Somebody else like to talk to this proposal? Valerie?
My name is Kathy Lloyd, 1600 West Orchard Avenue, Hermiston. And I did provide Heather with a written copy of this for each of you. Today we are looking, is this on okay? Okay. Today we are looking at the possibility of adding wording to existing zoning that would allow for a temporary emergency nighttime shelter to be built within the light industrial zones of the city of Hermiston. If one researches the basic human needs of life, one will find that a traditional list of immediate basic needs is food, including water, shelter, and clothing. Considering this, it would appear that as a humane society, we have, as a whole, have an obligation, when feasible, to help provide for those very basic human needs. Safe shelter allows one not only to relax and sleep, but allows the individual the opportunity to regroup and plan for something more than their current situation. This is especially true if the temporary shelter is able to provide a place for homeless individuals to safely leave their belongings during the day rather than having to carry everything they belong with them everywhere they go. Currently in Hermiston, we have the Hermiston Warming Station that is allowed to operate for 100 evenings each year. Due to the limited number of nights, the warming station chooses to be open from the end of November until the beginning of March, which typically is the coldest time of the year. However, as frequently seen, there are other nights during the year that weather can present challenges. A winter warming station is simply not enough. Those same individuals needing winter shelter often require shelter the rest of the year as well. Due to the size of our community, there are few housing choices available and even more limited low-income housing. When there's no shelter available, we see the endemic camps that currently exist along the river, in areas of large overgrowth, near Harrison Park, or along the Oxbow Trail. As of 3 years ago, Oregon had an estimated 13,953 individuals experiencing homelessness, including 1,083 family households, 1,251 veterans, 1,462 unaccompanied young adults between the ages of 18 and 24, and 3,387 individuals who were experiencing chronic homelessness. Our nation, our state, our county, and our immediate community has a homelessness problem, and turning a blind eye to it will not make it go away, nor make it decrease. It is naive to say that the homeless individuals in Hermiston are not from Hermiston. As a longtime Hermiston resident and volunteer at the warming station, I can testify to the number of young people that I knew in years past who attended our local schools who have come and spent nights at the warming station. The homeless are our people, and we need to care for them throughout the year. We are not here today to discuss a specific project or a specific location. That is a decision that should be made down the road by the Hermiston City Council. We are discussing the need to allow the opportunity for some project at some point to be able to help meet the basic human need of shelter, an opportunity to sleep in a clean, safe environment. When looking at areas within the city that might be feasible, it is reasonable to rule out protected farmland, commercial land, and residential property. That leaves us light industrial zones. There are few areas within Hermiston that fall into that category. Much has been made that some of those areas might be near a park or sports complex. Rather than automatically ruling out those areas and thereby limiting even further the possibility of a nighttime shelter, it seems reasonable to allow for the change of wording to the zoning to occur, and then trusting to the wisdom of the city staff and council to determine each project individually and put into place the necessary precautions and safety measures. We should never make decisions based on public pressures or imaginary what-ifs. Let's consider for a moment the various locations of the Hermiston warming station. In the past, it's been located in the basement of a church. It has been in the 200 block on Main Street. It has rotated among churches, and for a few years, it was in the Ark before coming to its location on 395. When located on Main Street, there were not major issues with loitering, vandalizing, or theft from the adjoining businesses. And it's essential to remember that the Ark sits between Hermiston High School and West Park Elementary School and is right in the middle of Mackenzie Park. While there, the warming station did not create major issues of concern for the Hermiston community. It has been said that a year-round shelter is not the same as a winter warming station. While this is true, it is feasible to assume that at least a portion of those who would avail themselves of the current warming station would also avail themselves of a year-round station. The Hermiston warming station has a good record of providing safe nighttime shelter during the winter for homeless individuals. There's no reason to believe that a year-round shelter with good planning and good structure would do differently. We, as a community, have a moral obligation to help others. As we improve the lives of the least within our community, we better our community as a whole. Rather than wait until there's a huge issue, let us have the foresight to plan and provide for the homeless in our area now. Please provide within the Hermiston zoning code a way that our community may provide temporary emergency nighttime shelter for those in need. Thank you for your time and attention.
Kathy, you want to mark?
Perfect. Oh, okay.
Clean up after yourself.
And I'll put this back up. Did I catch loading at all?
Wipe it down, just in case. Thank you. Anybody else like to talk to this proposal? Anybody like to say something against this proposal?
Yes, I'm Alan Lambert, 50 West Beach Avenue, Hermiston. I'm totally unprepared. I submitted an email late today. I believe you have that in the last sentence or paragraph. I've said that it was my knowledge that there would be no further hearing from this until September. So it's left us with about 2 hours since I read the Hermiston Herald this afternoon that I found out there was more to it tonight. So please bear with me. First and foremost, I want to point out or state we are not against helping the homeless all others in the community. We help in all sorts of ways already and are only more than willing to advance to something else. And I know this is not the time or place, but I have some proposals that I'd like to present to the stepping stones, the planning commission, the city council, that would alleviate a lot of the controversy and problems maybe that I perceive with this proposal by stepping stones, that would alleviate an ongoing cost to the city of what possibly could end up in hundreds of thousands of dollars. The whole facility that's in Walla Walla, when you take into account of the money that's spent there, it's probably in excess of $200,000 or $300,000 annually. I think there's a far better way which could be supported by every business or most businesses in town. There would be no necessity for a so-called shelter, and the cost would be much less, but I know this is not the place or time to even bring that up. But I just want you to know that we are not against helping people. In relation to the change in the zoning code to allow for these facilities, like I said, I'm totally unprepared. In Clint's statements tonight, or his evaluation, or like representative with, he clearly states there is an impact to the adjoining businesses. And also in other testimony we've heard, there is an impact to the parks. And from what I heard tonight, the people that visited Walla Walla were given the fact that they'd never ever considered putting a facility such as this near a park. In the email I sent late today that I wrote up several weeks ago, I'll have to find it. In part of the city's presentation, it said that the 1,000-foot requirement from the park should not need to be a requirement as with a smoke shop. And quote, not equitable to subject a temporary shelter to a higher standard than a smoke shop. Given the understanding that this situation would be available to anybody, why would the city not consider that this 1,000 feet requirement from a park not be subject to at least the same standards as a smoke shop? Surely the clientele of this proposed camp, I hate to say it, but are they going to be better citizens than the ones that go to a smoke shop? I'll leave that one alone for now. We do, I know you're aware, we do own an adjoining property. And Phil Simeotti owns Ross Machine. And as we've heard tonight, the one camp at Walla Walla is very isolated. This proposed site is not very isolated. I think, Kathy, you mentioned at one of the meetings that, and quite proudly, that the facility you're proposing on Harbour Road has a fence, it's been fenced and put barbed wire around it. I only assume that's that nobody can get in there when they're closed. What are we going to do next door? to keep these people out anytime. And I don't like using the word "these people," but it's a fact. If you dump 30 or 40 people out there in the morning, or 10 or 20 can't get in at night because they get there too late or the place is full, how are we going to keep them off our property? It's an impossibility. The impact to the value of the property, Clint's already stated 6-7%. What if it's 25%? What if it's 30%? What if we can't even sell the property? I know if I was looking for another property to invest in, there was a homeless camp within 60 feet of my office door, or proposed building with an office there, I know I wouldn't even look at it.
That's the time.
So what do you do? I think everyone has very good intentions.
Mr. Lambert, if I may interrupt. I forgot to say that we should try to limit our testimony to 5 minutes each. And I know that much of what you're saying was repeated last month.
I know.
And it's in the record, and we recognize that. So if you could perhaps bring anything new to the table. And wrap up so we can have other people testify.
I'd definitely like to meet with the city, Stepping Stones, whoever else might be interested in a proposal that would be more effective and at less cost and less hassle, and no need to change any zoning, make allowances for different ones, including myself. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lambert.
Just have to say one more thing. Do not allow it to go there. It would be a total disaster for the surrounding areas. Sorry. Thank you.
Anybody else would like to speak to this? Commissioners, do you have any questions? Any other points you want to bring up before we close the hearing?
Mr. Lambert mentioned in his letter the issue of parking, and that at the Walla facility there were people that were coming in parking every day. Derek, I don't know if you saw or talked to them at all about parking while you were up there, but
I can tell you what I noticed about the parking situation. It was, like I said, kind of an unimproved street there, and it was so far as I can tell, one way in, one way out street. So there was not a lot of parking. The road wasn't very wide. It was kind of difficult to maneuver around and get turned around and drive back out. I did not think they had probably adequate parking at their facility where they were, but I don't, part of that was because of the limitations on the streets they were on. But there weren't a lot of options for parking in the Walla facility, I don't think.
Okay, anybody else would like to say anything before I close the meeting? Oh, go ahead, Charlie.
You guys hear me? Okay, there we go. Clint, when you spoke, you mentioned an M2 zone. Would you mind walking us back through that? I'll apologize. I'm catching up with all of this and just want to make sure I understand everything correctly.
In the city of Hermiston, we have two industrial zones. We have the M1 zone, which is our light industrial zone, that it does storage, manufacturing, and warehousing. It is spread more throughout the city. There is some M1 property on Elm. There's some M1 property on First Place. There's M1 property, like we're talking about here on Carver Road, that was the original impetus for this. And then that M1 property moves south along 395 out towards where the Best Western is. And then once you cross that line there, where Campbell Boulevard and Kelly Boulevard are, we switch from our M1 zoning to our M2 zoning, which is our heavy industrial zone. And the M2 zone operates more as almost a catch-all for industrial users. Literally, when you have the permitted uses in the M2 zone, it's any manufacturing not listed in the M1 zone. So, and that is the area between Campbell Boulevard and Feedville Road as you go south. The Walmart Distribution Center, the vacant land on the east side of Highway 395. As you move along Feedville Road where the grain elevators are, where Circle C equipment is, that's all M2 rather than M1. Thank you.
Okay.
My name is Brandy Magrano, 1215 West Hartley, and I'm from Walla. I grew up there, and I was one of those people. I was one of those people that was homeless. I would take my daughter and my clothes in a little Red Ryder wagon across town to wash my clothes. I had nowhere to go. I had no family. Everybody was gone. And I got into the Christian Aid Center, which is a different location. The Walla facility wasn't there yet at the time, but they helped me get into programs, and the location is right downtown. It was key. I was able to get into parenting classes. They got me my first job. We would make tamales in the kitchen, and we would also sell them. So that was part of the community giving back. So I had my first job through them. I had the support. And it took a lot of trust to get to that point. I went from dragging my Red Ryder wagon all across town with people laughing and pointing and honking to a point where somebody said, hey, you're important enough. I trust you. I know you're going to take care of the property I give you. They gave me dishes. And it took just that little bit of help, just that little bit of, hey, you're important enough, let me help you. And because of that, because of the location, I was able to excel. I got a good job, I moved over here, I have my children. If I don't have that, I don't know where to be. So yes, the location is important, the help is important. Somebody saying that you are important enough is important. And the people that don't have a place to live, they're still gonna be here, or they're gonna go somewhere else. But do you really want them to go into a bad situation? Do you want them pulling a little Red Ryder wagon with a child across town? Because that's what will happen. Give them a hand, give them trust. Give them a place where they can excel and become something. So yeah.
Thank you. Anyone else? Commissioners, are we ready to close the meeting?
Before you close the hearing, you should make acknowledgement that the file is here as part of the record.
I'm sorry?
Before you close the hearing, you should make an acknowledgement that the file is physically in front of the planning commission and part of the record.
Okay. Bill?
Yeah, I'm sorry I missed some of this conversation, but can I ask Clint a few questions regarding this? Clint, is it true, just clarify that HB 4212 requires the city to establish the guidelines for this if someone applied for it during the period that particular law said it had to be done?
I wouldn't say that it requires us to establish a guideline. It actually requires approval of a proposal, with or without a guideline.
Okay, so we have to do this then, is that what you're saying?
No, we recommend that this be done because the provisions of House Bill 4212 sunset on September 30th, I believe. 30th. And once that happens, then the city would have basically no language, and should a proposal come up, we would be right back where we are again. So as long as the city council has directed staff to prepare text, it's best to keep moving it forward, so it's in place after 4212 sunsets.
Okay, I'm still a little confused. So what the process we're going through is something that City Council and the HB 4212 requires us to do. Is that?
The City Council did.
Oh, okay, and so then the question tonight is whether or not we establish this, not where it's going to be established, it's whether we establish it. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, thanks.
Clint, should we let Bill join us?
I'm sorry, the static is kind of distracting to me. Can you repeat that?
Should we let him join us up here?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Oh, he was fine. He wanted to sit over
He wants to sit in
Clarifying question on that. My understanding is that the House bill actually wouldn't apply to something like this because under the House bill, it has to meet current building codes, et cetera, into these shelters to fall under what is in the current House bill. So this is something different, additional, that we're looking at.
Actually, everything in these developments is required to meet building codes. The building official has been working with stepping stones to determine, what the requirements will be, but they are subject to building code requirements, what their original proposal is.
Clint, a couple more questions if I may. So is there anything in what's been proposed that would be in addition to what the city is required to provide?
Do you mean required to provide under 4212 or under Boise v. Martin?
I guess either way. I mean, are we considering anything that would be, I know you brought up M1, M2, I mean, that might be different, but is there anything that is in the proposal that would be outside of what we would be normally required to provide?
I would say that the text of the language that's in front of the Planning Commission tonight is actually more restrictive than the requirements of 4212. The requirements of 4212 are shall approve whatever it is as long as it meets building code requirements and isn't in a development hazard overlay area, floodplain, or a steep slope, something like that. The cities don't have a lot of leeway under applications submitted under that. Under this one, it moves into a conditional use process where it is subject to a public hearing, discretion of the Planning Commission to impose conditions. There are additional life and safety requirements that aren't in 4212. So this bill actually is more restrictive than what the state has proposed.
Are we ready to close the hearing, Commissioners? The hearing is closed. Thank you all for your testimony. We would ask that you now remain quiet while we do our deliberations and come to decisions. So, Commissioners, where do you want to start? Do we want to?
I'll kick it off here.
You kick it off, too.
I'm extremely sympathetic and totally understand the need of the community for stepping stones in our community. But I do have reservations about the siting, where it's going to go in. Here's my reasoning on that. Just some of the testimony at the last meeting that was introduced. We had photographic evidence of drug paraphernalia being laying around that area out there by the park and the entrance and over by Agape House. That kind of concerns me a little bit, especially with a sports park right next door. My two daughters and our family used that park quite a bit when they were growing up through school. And, it's not the older kids that worry me so much. It's, you know, the families that go out there when they're playing baseball and stuff that, you know, they have younger children with them, and sometimes they're just out running around the bleachers and stuff like that and getting off the beaten path. And my concern is that, you know, they may become exposed to something inadvertently out there. And that's enough of a cause for me to, you know, kind of think about this a little bit more about what we're wanting to do with this ordinance. A couple other factors that kind of brought up, that in my mind anyway, was just there's just a 6-inch chain link, or a 6-foot chain link fence that's separating the driveway from the actual living facility. You know, the driveway goes through there for the sport park, and it's just a chain link fence right there. Not that the folks inside there is gonna, you know, come out, because I think they have pretty strong controls over, you know, the residents there during the evening. It's just the folks that didn't get in there, or they're too late to check in, or they come in late because a friend of theirs might be in the facility. They might be just hanging around that area there. The other issue I have is, you know, the park is there. Mainly, the people using it are going to be there in the evenings, you know, playing baseball and whatnot. And the check-in time at the stepping stones is, I think, 5 p.m. You don't check in anybody before that. I think it's from there, and I don't know how long the check-in time goes. Now, I'm just afraid we're going to have people milling around there after hours while, you know, people are still utilizing the park. You know, and for those reasons, I want to request commissioners to consider maybe adding parks to this amendment, zoning amendment 157.055, section 5 of part H. You know, now, I think that's where I'm coming from on this.
And I thank you, Jim. And I apologize, despite Clint telling me that I should have, as I closed the hearing, mentioned for the record that the file is before the planning commission. So I do that now.
I guess my 50 cents. I think that this, certainly M1, maybe even M2, is the proper zoning for this to happen. But I have questions about implementation. How do we protect the citizens from the adverse effects? And I think that part of that is the buffer zone, and the other part of that is the conditional use process. You know, and what we can do then. As long as those two things are in this, I'm comfortable. As to what the proper buffer should be, I said, should it include parks? I think so. Should it include schools? Definitely. Should it include preschools? I am not as in favor for that. That's not as permanent a structure, and it can open, it can close. It makes it confusing, so I would include that personally. That's my 10 cents, I guess.
I had a couple of comments. I think, first of all, I was generally in line with what Jim and Ben said about parks. Although although I have kind of gone back and forth on that. I don't think there's, parks are public places for everybody to go to, and that includes people that don't have homes. I don't have a problem with that, but I do kind of feel like if you have a facility, especially one that's not going to be taking people in 24 hours a day, it's going to have limited hours, and it's right next to a park, that's going to be kind of the de facto place to go to wait for the place to open up, right? So, the hour before they open, the hour maybe after they open, it's a place for people who are out of doors to go, which is fine. I mean, that's part of what parks are for. I just think that when you have the park right next to the facility, that becomes one park where everybody's at, versus all of the parks, a little bit at all of the parks. I think it might kind of tend to concentrate that there. I don't know if that's good or bad, honestly, but I think in general, I feel like a buffer zone is probably a better idea, whether it's 1,000 feet or whatever. I sort of agree with Ben too. I'm not sure about preschool sitting in that list. Kind of ambivalent about that, I guess. The only other comment I had, I think in general I'm in favor of this ordinance. I think what Clint has written up here is good. I don't really have a lot of comments about it, but one of the requirements under 5C is that in connection with the conditional use application, the applicant will furnish a business plan, operation plan, supporting documentation. I guess one thing I am wondering is whether this ordinance should require the operation plan to provide for on-site security, or whether that should be just something that's addressed in the conditional use process. But I can't, sitting here now thinking about an application that would come in front of us that didn't provide for security, I can't imagine one that I would think that's fine with. Think that I'm fine with that. So I almost think maybe that should be part of this ordinance too, but I don't know. I just wanted to throw that out there, I guess.
Clint, if I may ask one more, well, maybe more than one question. Under the proposed ordinance on, under letter R, as in Rudolph, it says that they would have to come back to the planning commission annually. What opportunity do we have as planning commission members or as a whole to further change the ordinance after a year's time if obvious things have not worked out according to what we believe it would be or should have been or whatever?
The section Q allows the planning commission to modify conditions of approval or revoke a conditional use permit if on a finding that the operator is not meeting the conditions of approval.
So should we strike the word annual in paragraph 1? That might be confusing. If the planning commission were to a six-monthly review period?
The only thing I would think is in Q, and this was part of the discussion that we had at our initial work session. In Q, we actually originally had it set to be an annual review, and the planning commission thought that that might not be appropriate because sometimes it might need to be longer, sometimes it might need to be shorter. And so we actually changed the language to say, emergency shelter shall be subject to review by the planning commission subject to the standards for conditional use permit. The planning commission shall set the schedule for review as part of the conditional use process. So the planning commission, the ordinance now has the discretion to set the schedule for review, however you see fit.
Right. I was asking if under paragraph R, we should delete the word annual.
Oh, okay.
so that there's no
Yes.
misunderstanding or ambiguity between the two carriers.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That word should be struck.
So, Bill, did that answer your question, or was there a little? I think one thing I was understanding from your question was about changing this actual ordinance versus, you know, if we discover down the road that there are things we wish we had put in this ordinance that weren't there. What
Yeah,
would it be?
yes, that's what I really was asking.
Yeah, Mike is saying that we do have the ability to do that under 5Q with the ability to apply the additional conditions of approval in the future. If you amend the ordinance, then you're going through a post-acknowledgement land use every time.
Because Phil, if you read paragraph Q, as in Queen, on the next page, planning commission may modify conditions of approval or revoke a conditional use permit for a temporary emergency shelter upon finding that the operator has not met the conditional use permit standards of.
Yeah, I saw that. I was more concerned about what might be changed in the future of something we hadn't considered in this process. Another question I had was something that Derek brought up. It says in number C, as in cat, that a business plan, operation plan, et cetera, will be provided, but where's the oversee of that? I mean, their business plan could stink, but that doesn't mean that we have an opportunity then to say it stinks and that it needs to be revised, or we do? We do, okay.
Mr. Chair, let me make a point about Commissioner Ham's question about the effect of an amendment to this ordinance if the city council adopts it. My name, by the way, is Mike Robbins. I'm legal counsel for the city. If you have a conditional use that's approved under this ordinance and the city council later amends this ordinance, the conditional use is a non-conforming use that doesn't have to comply with post-adoption amendment to the ordinance. Now, you can get to it via section Q, which Clint just described to you. But if the city council adopts this ordinance, later amends it, and this use is operating, those later text amendments to this ordinance would not apply to the existing or operating use.
Hey, Clint, one more question for you. A couple of folks have mentioned that if a city wants to pass an ordinance, a no camping ordinance on public places, the city must provide another suitable site. With this being a privately funded, operated facility, would that satisfy? Could the city of Hermiston then down the road say, we want to impose a no camping ordinance just because this exists, or does the city have to provide its own?
You know, I'm going to ask Mike to back me up on this, but it's my understanding in the Boise decision that it's a cumulative of all of the available facilities within a city have to be adequate to accommodate the population before you can pass a no camping ordinance, not just city-owned facilities.
I did want to say that, I do feel that the schools and the parks were warranted. Get a little closer. What's that? Can you hear me? No? All right. I am in favor of the schools and parks being buffered from these facilities. I think that's fair. I know that there isn't a perfect facility or perfect location. Is that better? I don't know many people who say they want my voice amplified, but anyway. Those are my concerns, the parks and the schools. I feel that that's fair, a fair buffer. I do, while I have a microphone, just want to say thank you for coming to stand up in a group of people that are strangers and tell your story. That's a brave thing to do, so we really appreciate that. Thank you.
this is for you. I was just wondering if this ordinance does pass tonight, the stepping stones or any other facilities of that nature, would they have an ability to come back and request some sort of relief from this ordinance, like through a variance or something like that?
A couple of points. Apparently my voice carries a little better. Tonight, the ordinance wouldn't pass one way or the other. The Planning Commission is only making a recommendation to the council, who has their hearing in September. And then, yes, anytime you have a land use development standard, an applicant is able to request a variance under the provisions in our code. So, you know, whether they want to increase density or change something, you know, for whatever reason, find that the height of the fence isn't adequate or whatever, those are always options that are available for relief.
Well, Dean, I feel I'd be remiss not to add to the conversation. Even though I'm just joining the commission, we lived for a number of years very close to that area, and we took our kids numerous times to that park. And as I've listened to everyone tonight, and as I've read the materials that were provided to us this week, I reflect on our own experiences, and I do agree with my fellow commissioners in that I think there needs to be a buffer zone from a park. And I had a personal experience where someone, I'm going to assume, was certainly down on their luck because they approached me and asked to use for my phone while we were there with the kids one day. And, you know, without thinking about it, I said, yeah, here you go. And then I realized, well, I've just given that person my telephone. It has all of my banking information, and I unlocked it and handed it to them, and I'm not sure that was the best idea. So I had to stick close to that person and wait until they were done with their phone call. But I think we need to provide adequate separation for families from a facility like this, and I agree with the buffer around the park.
Okay, Commissioner, are we ready to amend the proposed ordinance?
I guess I am curious what other people think about whether we should make some provision in here for security or not, or leave that to the conditional use process.
If I could just jump in on that, the chief of police, in my discussions with him, has said that of any facility he would like to see a security plan that he could go over with the operators. So a security plan would be certainly an appropriate additional document to require. And to Commissioner Ham's point that all Section C says is that it has to be submitted. There's nothing really binding in that language. It's somebody literally could say, well, I've given it to you. I certainly think we could amend it, submitted, and reviewed as part of the conditional use process so that the Planning Commission does have a little more teeth, or approved.
So submitted and approved, or submitted and
Yes.
review, submitted and approved, that's what you're saying.
I think that would probably work.
So would that be something that staff would do prior to the conditional use hearing?
Generally, yes. In most situations, we have a committee that meets and reviews all development proposals, and we do that every other week. And as needed, we bring in additional staff members. Parks comes in sometimes. Fire is always there. And in a situation like this, we would invite representatives of the police department to review as well.
And Clint, were you suggesting that in that same point, C, that a security plan would be, okay?
Yes.
I'm sensing that there seems to be unanimity here. First thing we need to do, first action we need to take is to approve the findings of fact. Do I have a motion for approval?
So move.
Second.
Okay. We have a motion and second to approve the findings of fact as written. Any discussion?
I assume there's no problem with the fact that this talks about the future things that are to happen, so it haven't actually happened for our, like, such as the September 14th city council meeting.
That's correct. Ultimately, the council is the final decision-making body, so they're the ones who actually approve the appealable findings, and that's why I wrote them this way. Trying to cover all my bases with one drafting.
Any other discussion? All those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion passed. Now, the draft ordinance. What does the commission want to do for paragraph C? As in Charlotte.
I would move that we recommend that the city council adopt the draft ordinance with the following, as written, but with the following amendments. Paragraph 5C, providing for a business plan, operation plan, inserting security plan, and all supporting documentation for resident rules shall be submitted and approved as part of the conditional use permit application. Amending paragraph H, to say the facility should be located at least 1,000 feet from any public or private elementary, junior high, or high school, park, at least 1,000 feet from another temporary emergency shelter. And amending paragraph R to strike the word annual from the sentence beginning at least 45 days prior to the meeting.
Okay, we have a motion. Two. I'm sorry? You want a second? Okay.
Before we get too far down this, we did have our initial discussion about adding M2 zoning, which would require a little bit more of a text amendment. It'd have to add another section to the ordinance to do that. But I think that's something that the planning commission should determine now, because that would open up considerable more information.
Okay, so the motion we have on the table right now adds to paragraph C a security plan and having all those plans, operation, business plan, et cetera, submitted and approved by the planning commission. Paragraph H, adding 1,000-foot buffer to parks. And paragraph R, striking the word annual. Do we want to add M2 zone into this to get a little extra room?
Could you walk us through why originally, what was the thought process of not having it? Does it decrease too much of a...
More than anything, it was that the M2 zone, for the most part right now, is pretty vacant, and there aren't a lot of permitted industrial uses there that it could be an accessory use too. But that's not saying that that wouldn't happen in the future.
Dean, would it be appropriate to also include a request to the city council that they review an anti-camping plan if we have an ordinance that allows for these facilities? may be opening another can of worms here, but as I think about the cities to which I've traveled in our region, I would appreciate our city council or even our commission having forethought to say we do not want people camping overnight in public places if we have another space for this.
In addition to the Boise case that's here in the Ninth Circuit yesterday, there was a case that was approved where the city of Grants Pass lost their ability to find people for camping. So it's certainly something we can look at, but right now the court cases are definitely going against cities for anti-camping ordinances.
I guess for sake of argument, we have a motion on the table we need to look at, and then we can discuss your idea after we deal with this motion on the ordinance.
I think that was more of a direction than an argument. I'll accept it. Sounds good.
Dean.
If I'm looking at the maps correctly, it looks like all the M2 zoning is to the south of the city along 395 Seafield, Benny, that area.
Yeah, the area south of the yellow polygons that are around Airport Road, all of the white area there, that's all our M2 zoning.
Dean.
Bill.
Yes, does the motion include both M1 and M2? I didn't catch that.
The motion includes only M1 at this point, because the original draft of the ordinance only has M1 zone. I should have looked it up, but in the M2 zone, for conditional uses, what does it say?
Let me bring that up.
Does a conditional use in an M1 be automatically a conditional use in an M2?
I'm almost positive it does not, and we encountered that in our junkyard ordinance. Yeah, conditional uses in the M2 zone are limited to temporary dwelling unit, junkyard, planned unit development, and handicraft permit. So the M1 uses do not carry down.
Okay.
We would have to create a second section that says it's a conditional use. We'd have a number 4 there, and it would be temporary emergency shelter subject to the design standards in 157, yada, 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 where we're inserting these.
Lee. I would suggest that if we are going to pass an ordinance that, or suggest to the council, city council, an ordinance that has 1,000 feet from these different, schools, parks, so forth, that we include both M1 and M2 in our proposal to give more flexibility and opportunity for something like this to occur. And so I don't know if I want to amend the amendment or wait till we vote on this. It gets cumbersome, I know.
Almost, if the consensus of the planning commission were to do the M2, you would basically vote against the current motion and then motion again with the M2.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and proceed with the motion as proposed by Derek without the M2 in the draft ordinance. Any more discussion? All those for the motion, say aye. Aye. All those opposed?
Aye.
Motion failed. Phil?
I would move a very similar motion that was just voted down to include both M1 and M2 zones. So everything plus that.
Okay. So you're moving the paragraph C includes security plans and all the plans are submitted approved. Paragraph H adds 1,000-foot buffer to the parks. Paragraph R strikes the word annual, and Clint, you said a new paragraph has to be added?
Yeah, there would be a new section 2, which would amend, which would basically amend 157 056B to include temporary emergency shelter subject to the design standards in 157 055B5.
So that's what you thought, huh, Phil?
That's fine with me.
Second. So we have a motion and a second. similar to the last, but including M2 into the allowed areas. Any more discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign? Motion passed.
And this will be going to the city council for a public hearing on September 14th. And I do want to apologize to Mr. Lambert. I think we had a miscommunication when he came in. He came in on the day of a city council meeting where we had moved it to September. And so he said, oh, it's been moved to September. We didn't think to mention, oh, but the planning commission is meeting first. We had only thought that the city council meeting you were looking for had been bumped up. So I apologize for the miscommunication.
But thank you all for coming for this.
Clint, I was just wondering, did HB 4212, was that superseding HB 401?
401 didn't pass. It did not pass through the legislature because of the walkout. So had that passed, that would have been permanent. Change to the shall approve for shelters, and HB 4212 had a 90-day.
Well, I would like to discuss with the commission, is it our place to recommend to the city? Do my fellow commissioners think that's appropriate for us to say we'd like to explore, although it seems that this is going against cities who have an anti-overnight camping plan? Do we want to explore that possibility?
I'm against it. I think it's premature. We don't have something in place yet. And certainly until there is something adequate in place, I don't think that they should be doing it.
Got it. What if we said when something is in place, we recommend? Or is that up to us to remember down the road? Okay.
I would leave you as a private citizen, you can bring that before the city council. Okay. Next, we have another public hearing on a text amendment to 157.136, accessory dwellings. There is some supplemental findings of facts placed before us this evening. Are there any commissioners who have a conflict of interest with this? Seeing none, I open this hearing. Planning Commission is holding a hearing to consider amending the Hermiston Code of Ordinances section 157.136, subparagraph A, subparagraph 3, subparagraph G, accessory use provisions, authorization. The applicant is Kelly Noble. The applicable substantive criteria relied upon by the city in rendering the decision to amend the zoning text are contained in 157.226 of the Hermiston Code of Ordinances. Testimony and evidence must be directed towards the criteria described above or other criteria in the comprehensive plan or land use regulation that the person believes to apply to the decision. Failure to raise an issue by the close of the record at or following the hearing, in person or by letter, precludes appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals or the City Council based on that issue. Failure to provide statements or evidence sufficient to afford the decision maker and the parties an opportunity to respond to that issue precludes appeal to LUBA or the City Council based on that issue. For this hearing, the process begins with the staff report, followed by testimony from the applicants and any other supporters of the application. This will be followed by opponents to the application. Finally, a rebuttal by the applicant will be allowed. The public hearing portion of the procedure will then be closed, and the Planning Commission will consider the information and testimony received and make a recommendation for approval for denial to the city council. Clint, you have a staff report.
I do. Tonight, the Planning Commission is considering a citizen-initiated text amendment from Kelly Nobles. The applicant requests that the provisions for accessory dwellings be expanded to include single-wide manufactured homes. Currently, in our zoning code, single-wide manufactured homes have their own development standards as a separate section in the zoning ordinance, and single-wide manufactured homes in that section are limited specifically to manufactured home parks. And any home placed outside of a manufactured home park must be multi-sectional. And so as a result of these design requirements, staff has interpreted it to mean that a manufactured home, if it's used as an accessory dwelling, must also be multi-sectional. Basically, if the code is saying a manufactured dwelling can only be, a single wide can only be in a park, it seems like you can't use one as an accessory dwelling as well. And so the proposed language amends the accessory dwelling code to clarify this and to state that where a manufactured dwelling is proposed as an ADU, it does not have to meet the city's multi-sectional requirement and does not require a garage or a carport. The garage or carport requirements were inserted because of the provisions of HB 4212, which now prohibit the city from requiring off-street parking as part of an ADU construction. So if we can't require any off-street parking for an ADU, we cannot require garage or carport, which are essentially parking spaces. So that's the basic requirement that's in the code amendment. The text amendment also proposes 2 additional sub-clauses. The first is based on our requirement that manufactured dwellings need to be more than 1,000 square feet whenever they're placed outside the park. Since a single wide is never as large as 1,000 square feet, or rarely, in researching, I was able to find a couple that went up to 1,200. But this requirement requires that the primary dwelling needs to remain on the property as long as the ADU is on site. It's an attempt to retain that 1,000 square foot minimum outside of parks and not have a single wide come in, have the primary dwelling be torn down, and then there's a single wide that's essentially non-conforming. So that's why that requirement is there. And the second subclause states that when a large multi-sectional manufactured dwelling is proposed, the existing dwelling may be considered the accessory dwelling, and the new unit could be a primary dwelling when the primary dwelling is less than 1,000 square feet. This is something that's likely only to apply in the very oldest sections of town where there are some 800, 900 square foot lots. However, these lots are also very small in land area and are unlikely to accommodate a large new dwelling. Basically just put it in because if we're doing manufactured dwellings as accessory dwellings, I thought it was important to have some language in there that considered what might happen if somebody brought in something bigger than the primary dwelling. So I recommend that the Planning Commission consider the text amendment in 3 parts. First is the amendment to allow single wides as ADUs acceptable. Second, is it necessary to clarify that the primary dwelling needs to remain as long as the single wide is on the site? And third, is it necessary to clarify that a larger manufactured dwelling may allow the existing dwelling to become an ADU? As part of the public noticing that we did, we received comments from the Fair Housing Council this morning that point out they support the ordinance in theory, but that the city, they felt, did not have an adequate Goal 10 set of data. And so you have in front of you an additional 10 findings of fact to support Goal 10, our housing supply, basically. They stated some court cases that said whenever the city is doing Goal 10 work, you need to be able to demonstrate that it doesn't impact your housing supply in a negative way. So I created some findings that the essence of which is we have excess capacity for about 8,000 more units in our urban growth boundary than we need for our 20-year supply on residential land, and that this creates the ability to add about another 315 dwelling units. I based that on the assumption that the rulemaking for accessory dwellings and middle housing, the state wants cities to use a 3% as a baseline to assume how much might actually take advantage of middle housing and growth. So that works out to about 300 units on our existing. So we go from having an excess capacity of 8,000 units to 8,300 is basically what the findings say. I'd be happy to answer any other questions. The applicant is here tonight as well to offer any additional testimony that the planning commission might have.
Commissioner, do you have any questions for Clint?
Just curious on number 1 under G here. Dwelling is less than 1,000 square feet on the dwelling, is that? And I think you said earlier in your description that most of the single lines down are probably up around 1,200 square feet.
Most of them are about 900. They can get up to, I believe it was 53 feet long, and that wound up being about 1,200 square feet. But from my experience in researching the available ones, most of them were in the 900 to 1,000 square foot range.
Dean?
Questions? Phil?
So Clint, in a situation like number 1 or number 2, well, number 2 particularly, I guess, if the modular or multi-sectional model becomes the primary, so it's already going to be on the side of the lot, I mean somewhere, so doesn't that kind of mess up how the neighborhood looks if they were to take away the old primary building and without moving it to the center of the lot? I suspect that the house was. It seems like we might want to include something that requires them to even it up. I think if I was a part of that neighborhood, I think it would just look better. I bet we can't do that though, right?
I'm not sure how it would work in a text situation, because we would be dealing with literally every house sits in a different spot on a lot. So it's hard to come up with a uniform and objective way of wording that. Not saying it can't be done, I just hadn't put the thought into it yet.
Well, I'm just trying to think of keeping Hermiston looking to some standard, I guess, that's all.
What does number 2 accomplish? I mean, what is the sort of purpose of designating the manufactured home as the primary and the existing home or pre-existing home as the accessory? What's the impact of that, I guess?
More than anything, it's an accounting thing for staff. When we're trying to determine where we have ADUs and where we have dwellings, and we have to submit reports to DSU or the Census Department or something, more than anything, that's what it is. It doesn't actually change that much on the ground. And I have to admit, as I had moved through the staff report and all that, I questioned more and more the logic of 2.
So I guess I kind of wondered, is 2 necessary, do you think, or do you think it's...
Honestly, as I've thought about it, it can be jettisoned. It kind of contemplates a completely different situation than the single wide question.
Clint, would that then have to meet all the requirements of off-street parking and everything else that a normal house that would be a primary dwelling would have to meet?
Yeah, if that were the case, basically you're building a new primary dwelling, so you would have to accommodate that. You wouldn't be able to, in my opinion, exempt it from any parking requirements.
Any more questions for Clint? Mr. Noble, you want to speak to this?
Yeah, thank you.
20 Stevens Avenue, Umatilla, Oregon. Thank you for your time and considering this. You know, the purpose is really, as the state legislature wanted to see 2 more affordable housing. I have quite a few low-income rentals, you know, single apartments from 450 to 550 that include water, sewer, garbage, and double units from 525 to 600, and houses from 650 to 850. So a lot of these are older houses, and out on Hermiston Avenue, Southwest 8th area out there. So they're affordable because they are older, and I try to take care of laminate flooring and do some things to make them nice, but they're a lower assessed value, and I'm able to do affordable housing. The ADU concept really helps the addition of that. You know what? I don't have to pay hookup fees to put it in another place. I can probably bring those 2-bedroom or 3-bedroom if they're double wide for that same kind of budget. You know, so that'd be that lower 2nd, 2nd, and 3rd tier that report says where you have a lot of, you're above capacity in your housing, but not so much in the lower housing. And this accomplishes exactly what they want to do. And the comment about centering the double wide with the primary residence, I think you mentioned. I have some lots. I have one lot on the corner of Hermiston Avenue and Southwest 8th that had 2 homes on it. My aunt and uncle lived in one that burned down a number of years ago. And there's never been a house rebuilt there. And the lot is kind of funny because the house is over here and it has a perfect spot for that. So there's some situations where you want to do that. Obviously, you know, you don't want to go put something in that isn't going to look right. Not only will it decrease the value of the property for the owner, but, you know, the intent is to try to use some common sense, put a single wide. And by the way, single wides are also park models. You know, you go to the coast and you see a park model. Some of those are very nice. And some of those are small enough that they fit in behind the house very nicely. So there's a lot of opportunity here that I'd like to see and take advantage of for the benefit of the community, and as having rentals, you know, it's something that I can do affordably as well. So I would do it responsibly, even though there's no off-street parking. You have to have off-street parking, and the law needs to have, there's spots to have that, so you can accommodate that even though it's not required, and it should be, because you can't have too many cars on the street. The other thing that was mentioned, I think, was why a mobile home? Well, you know, the stick-built ADUs are, you know, like a mother-in-law place, pretty expensive. You know, the mobile homes are much more affordable to set up, and if you're trying to keep it in that lower price range, then you can get the double wide or the single wide to fit whatever the property is, and probably for less than half the price of coming in and trying to put in a foundation and do a stick build. So that's really the only reason for asking for the mobile homes. Otherwise, it wouldn't be you wouldn't want to build a new stick built behind the house as a low income. It'd be too expensive to do for low income. So that's the honest attempt to try to get things done. And if it makes sense, I hope you'll appreciate it. And if it doesn't, I accept that. Any questions?
Could you talk to paragraph 2 that you inserted in the draft ordinance, where you're changing the primary residence and ADU status if the ADU is larger than the pre-existing house. Why are you doing that?
So
I was a little confused with some of the other commissioners.
Yeah, well, to give you a specific example, most of these houses, 2-bedroom houses, they're less than 1,000, about 900 square feet. And like I said, I have one on the lot that had another house, and I could put a single wide if that's all you want, but it has plenty of room for a double wide, and it'd be just as affordable. I can have a 3-bedroom rental there and have it look right and be right. And then it makes sense that if you have that 3-bedroom home there, the smaller 900 square foot, we wouldn't take it away; it'd still be a rental. But you know, it would be more like an accessory dwelling unit than the larger home, just because you got a 2-bedroom and a 3-bedroom. Which one is your primary? Did that answer your question?
I suppose, yeah. I'm still not sure I quite understand why you want to do that.
You know, to tell you the truth, I don't think it would matter what you call it either, because
You have a couple of questions again for Clint. So we're not allowed to require additional off-street parking in this situation. How many places can you think of in the city where this proposal might be effective? If it became effective, would have multiple houses on the same lot, on the same street? In other words, I'm thinking of, is there a possibility that this requirement, which we apparently can't do anything about, will create a real parking and hazard because there's so many cars parking on the street?
When I think about the areas, I think about Hermiston Avenue and Orchard, and I think about the areas along Gladys and Ridgeway on the east side of town where most of the houses there don't have any driveways now. The stuff on the east side, those are generally 6,000 square foot lots. I don't think there's actually physically room to add them, but when we do the Hermiston Avenue side on the west side of town, going along Butte, going along Hermiston Avenue and Orchard, there are some bigger lots in those areas that would definitely accommodate multiple developments of this type. Now remember, our code only allows one accessory dwelling per lot. So right now, it wouldn't be, somebody would go in and do multiple ADUs on one lot without off-street parking. It is limited to one. But on that side of town, there are some bigger lots and there are more potential over there.
So in a situation like that, Clint, is there anything that we as a planning commission can do to help moderate a potential issue that might occur?
The parking requirement was originally put in as our attempt to moderate it under the first set of standards that came down from the legislature. And they definitely took away the one tool that all the cities were using. It's going to boil down to setbacks and lot coverage. You're still subject to all of those requirements, and definitely something like a double wide is going to be much harder to ever meet those setback and lot coverage requirements. A single wide that is 12 feet wide and 40 feet long is essentially parking an RV, same type of concept. So those generally will fit better. But like the legislature says, we had originally in our testimony on these bills said you're essentially doubling our buildable land capacity by allowing accessory dwellings, and now you can do that on every lot. And they at least gave some guidance that said we acknowledge that everybody is not going to take advantage of this. Assume it's only going to be about 50%.
In the situation where I've asked this question in the past where the definition of a family unit is not defined, then actually a single wide could actually have 6 or 7 people driving vehicles that live right there. So again, we're really have no choice, right, though?
If we did, I would definitely be having a stronger code ordinance. That we would have done the same thing with our ADUs. That we're very, very limited to basically time, place, and manner of where you can put them.
So, Clint, if I understand this right, though, this opens up all the tiny house stuff that we've been punting down the road and makes it all, as long as it meets the setback requirements that are pre-game.
Well, yes and no. It opens up a tiny house, in this case, if it's a pre-manufactured modular unit that's manufactured off-site. Manufactured homes are very strictly defined in the zoning ordinance and in the building code. They have to be HUD certified, they have to meet super good sense standards, they have to be tagged for road travel through the DMV. A lot of tiny houses aren't that So those would be covered under a different thing, but the park models, as Mr. Nobles mentioned, that sort of thing, I think, is really what this would open up as a tiny house. And those really are pretty good from an option as far as ADUs go. So there's some very nice ones out there.
Clint, you said that, like on East Ridgeway, most of the small homes there don't have any off-street parking. And I suppose on Hermiston Avenue, maybe there's more of that. Most of those homes do tend to have that.
Yeah.
Right? But what are in the abstract, what are the requirements for off-street parking in residential? Are they based on square footage or what are they?
It's based on bedrooms, except for that's only in multifamily. With a single family dwelling or a two-family dwelling, it's 2 spaces. You have to provide 2 off-street spaces for the dwelling.
So are there some of those homes on Hermiston Avenue or wherever that are kind of non-conforming in a sense? So I know that you cannot require additional off-street parking for the ADU, but in this subsection 2, if you make the manufactured home the primary, can you then require off-street parking of it as the primary?
I think so. I mean, we have in 157, 176, that accounts for those type of uses. You know, a single family dwelling has to provide 2 off-street parking spaces. So should that become the primary dwelling, they would need to put in 2 parking spaces, but the existing small 700 square foot house that doesn't have any would become a conforming ADU at that point.
Right. So I mean, it almost seems like if there's a point for number 2, it would be to make that mandatory. I mean, rather than to say it may be, that they may require them to do that, and then it gets an off-street parking out of it. I can kind of see an argument that's running a little bit. I mean, you're trying to do indirectly something that you couldn't require of it as an ADU. So I don't know if that's a legitimate thing to do or not.
Yeah, I think my only question is about, I don't know, it's hard to tell from the part of the ordinance, but as far as being a detached building, these mobile homes, single wides, when they get moved in, they'll be considered detached building, accessory dwelling unit. Does that mean they're required to be on a foundation permanent?
Yes, because when we have the exceptions to the standards for manufactured dwellings in A and F, that is literally just the double wide standard and the carport or garage. So all of the other standards for manufactured dwellings, foundation, are part of the
So
requirements.
no putting on blocks and skirting it in your backyard, right? Okay.
So I have, my concerns are more economic related. Manufactured homes are wonderful options for folks. Historically, they do not hold up their value. They do not add a significant financial benefit. In fact, right now, in August 2020, if you are trying to purchase one, with any type of loan product that is not government backed, good luck. I mean, really, good luck. My concern is manufactured homes have maybe that stigma to them, but it's also, there's some fact there. I just was looking up, Super Good Sense came into pass in 1995. So in theory, a 25-year-old single wide could be put on the lot next door to my house on a foundation. I don't, that is concerning to me. I don't know that really
what Derek was talking about. Would putting any accessory dwelling, but particularly here now we're talking about the single wide, if you put that on a lot, would that be something that would trigger making the primary have to become conforming? In other words, would they have to put a off-street parking on a house if they're trying to put an accessory dwelling on the same property?
That is not how the city has typically interpreted its ordinances. Typically, the city has interpreted things, if something was conforming when it was installed, it can continue that way, and only the part that's being improved needs to meet that. It's not retroactive on all of the property. The only time that's really not the case is with the life safety things with the building codes. That's the only time that they do tend to retroactively apply those.
I think it should.
So even if we were not to recommend that this ordinance be adopted, and so the city council would do anything with this, and somebody came and wanted to put single wide on property that is an accessory dwelling, I mean, notwithstanding what the other code provisions are about manufactured dwellings outside parks, under the state law, would they, you think they would be able to do that anyway?
I think not, because the city code is very explicit that those are limited to manufactured dwelling parks.
And that would take priority over. So really, the question of whether we adopt, recommend that it's adopted or not is in part whether we want to see it used as accessory dwellings.
Correct.
As the planning commission is consider all those comments, is there anyone else who wants to speak to this item on the agenda? Does anybody want to speak against this item on the agenda? Are we ready to close the?
Derek, I couldn't hear the last thing you said, sorry.
Well, I guess I was just asking Clint what the effect of not recommending that this ordinance be adopted would be, whether that would effectively mean that single wides could be used as an accessory dwelling. And I think that's Clint's view of that. So.
Are we ready to close the hearing? Anybody else want to speak? I close the hearing. Ladies and gentlemen, what do you wish to do? You want to expand on your comments, Tim? No, we need affordable housing. We do. That is so true, and I just don't know that this is it.
concern.
Clint, did you speak to how many lots where this could be a potential?
I haven't done an actual count. I would think it's probably, well, theoretically, all of them are. As far as ones that could physically accommodate it, it's probably
200?
I just try to think of most of the west side of town where there's not as well developed streets where you could actually go in and like access backyards and things. That'd be the main area I would think it would be.
Dean, I'd like to point out that in his discussion, Mr. Gold said that he would apply common sense and make things look nice. And sir, you sound like a very intentional and well thought out property owner. But I do have concerns if that applies to everyone. In my experience, common sense certainly doesn't. So I have concerns that if we approve something, the common sense rule may not apply, and all property owners may not be as careful as Mr. Nobles points out that he would.
Clint, what, if any, property tax implications are there with these dwelling units and single wides in particular?
They become a tax just like anything else based on the assessed value of the improvements. You're going to be looking at something that's has an assessed value of 40 to 50,000 probably going on there, and then taxed at, or right now, $22 per thousand, which I think 6 goes to the city.
Lee? Clint, another question sort of related to what Derek said earlier. Is there anything, we're required to do this at some degree, is there anything that we can do that would help us in the areas that we've discussed tonight to help alleviate some of the problems that might occur? Do we have our hands tied, in other words?
This amendment is discretionary. The code that we have now is compliant with the state legislature. So this one is not what I would call a requirement. It is discretionary, but yeah, I think that our current code precludes this type of development. As far as alleviating it, you would want, well, you've got, these are considered needed housing. You can't put additional requirements on them that are higher than or different than what you would be putting on your single family dwellings. So they're subject to setback and lot coverage. That's really what they would boil down to.
Along those lines, I'm not kind of clear why in paragraph G1, the fact that the primary dwelling can be removed, I don't see why that only applies to manufactured homes. I mean, shouldn't any accessory dwelling fall under that?
The intent was to maintain the city's manufactured dwelling standards that don't allow for single family or single wide manufactured dwellings to be a primary dwelling outside of a park, so that if one were to be placed, the primary dwelling on the lot would need to remain to maintain that the city's original intent. I'm sorry, I blanked out on the second part.
Well, so if you had any ADU, so stick-built ADU, and the primary house went away, shouldn't the ADU as well, particularly if it didn't have the off-street parking and other things that you require of normal primary. So I guess I'm questioning why this is so narrow, and shouldn't that apply to every house or every ADU, sorry.
That's an interesting point, and not one that we considered when we originally were drafting the code. My gut reaction is, yeah, it probably should. That's a really good point.
If not, how does the city make, I guess, how does the city enforce that one way or the other, either with ADUs or single family homes? I mean, if the primary house gets burnt down, do they lose their ability to occupy the accessory dwelling?
Yeah, it would have to be an amendment to the accessory dwelling code in a different area than this agreement. It'd probably be a new designation entirely, a section I.
Why would it not be possible to, if we were going to adopt this anyway, or recommend that we adopt it anyway, to break out, have a section G that talks about manufactured dwellings in whatever way we're going to talk about them, have a section H that just makes a general standard about when you're bringing in a accessory dwelling of less than a certain size, you know, the primary won't be removed or whatever from the property. And then you could renumber H, I guess. I mean, couldn't you still do that as part of the same amendment? Or?
You know, when you word it that way, we don't have in our code right now a minimum size for single-family dwellings. If we did, I think it might be different, but because we don't have a minimum size for single-family dwellings, I'm not sure we can say that the accessory dwelling doesn't by default become the primary dwelling.
Right. Would there be any tax implications of one being called the primary and the other being called the secondary, or is that just?
Yeah, I don't believe there is. It seems like they tax every structure based on its individual value, not on its how it's actually being used, but on the value of the structure.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we want to look at findings of fact. Your first step. And I'm a little confused with findings of fact, because you added supplemental findings 22 to 31.
Yeah, and then everything from.
And then I find that we have already up to 31.
Right. These would get inserted in as a new 22, and the existing 22 then would get renumbered all the way down to 33, or 32. So basically 23 becomes.
So these, okay, so the
34.
supplemental ones would be inserted under the current policies 21, 22, after number 22.
Yeah, can you say that again? I couldn't hear you very well.
Sorry. So your supplemental findings would be positioned where?
Number 22 under goal 10 would basically be renumbered to number 33, and all of these would be inserted into 21.
Okay. That's what I was asking.
I move that we accept the finding of fact as indicated in the addition of goals and
We have a motion and a second to accept findings of fact as amended with the supplemental findings. Any more discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion passed. Now, the proposed ordinance. We have a motion to approve the proposed ordinance as written. Amend or deny? No, I'm having yeah, we can go through the other one. Do we have a motion to approve the ordinance as written? Any second? Do we need a second to the?
Second.
Rather than Kayla?
Commissioner Hom seconded.
I'm sorry?
Commissioner Hom seconded.
Oh, sorry, Phil. You're just too far away, my hearing aids get.
That's fine, at least we can discuss the motion anyway, whether we like it or not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. There is another chair in this planning commission that says we always need a second, so we can always deny it. Thank you. So we have a motion to approve with a second. Any more discussion? All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion fails. Any other puzzles, Lynn?
And so your recommendation will go to the city council on August 24th, and there'll be a second hearing at that point, where your negative recommendation will be presented to them.
Okay, it's 9:15. I would propose a 5-minute recess to stretch legs and use restrooms. Okay, 5 minutes. Now, we have another hearing for the annexation off of Southwest 3rd Street of the, is it Desert Sky, right next to the Desert Sky development. Any commissioners have any conflicts? None seen. I open the hearing. Planning Commission is holding a hearing to consider a request for annexation to the city of Hermiston. Planning Commission will consider the request and make a recommendation based on the criteria established in 150.05 of the Hermiston Code of Ordinances. Applicant wishes to annex approximately 13.8 acre tract of land located on the south side of Southwest Desert Sky Drive and west of South 1st Street. The applicant is Jeff Newman. The applicable substantive criteria relied upon by the city in rendering the decision to annex the property are contained in 150.05 of the Hermiston Code of Ordinances. Testimony and evidence must be directed towards criteria described above or other criteria in the comprehensive plan or land use regulations which the person believes apply to the decision. Failure to raise an issue by the close of the record or at or following the hearing in person or by letter precludes appeals to the Land Use Board of Appeals, LUBA, or the City Council based on that issue. Failure to raise an issue with sufficient specificity to afford the decision maker and the parties an opportunity to respond to that issue precludes appeals to LUBA or the City Council based on that issue. Failure to raise constitutional or other issues relating to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the local government or its designee to respond to the issue precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Prior to the conclusion of the evidentiary hearing, any participant may request an opportunity to present additional evidence, arguments, or testimony regarding the application. Planning Commission shall grant such request by continuing the public hearing pursuant to ORS 197.763 subsection 6 subsection B, or leaving the record open for additional written evidence, arguments, or testimony pursuant to ORS 197.763 subsection 6 subsection C. For this hearing, the process begins with the staff report, followed by testimony from the applicants and any other supporters of the application. This will be followed by opponents to the application. Finally, a rebuttal by the applicant will be allowed. The public hearing portion of the procedure will then be closed, and the Planning Commission will consider the information and testimony received, adopt the findings of fact, and make a recommendation to the City Council on annexation. So, Clint, would you please proceed with the staff report?
Jeff Newman has submitted an application for annexation for approximately 13.8 acres of land located south and east of Southwest Desert Sky Drive and approximately 500 feet west of South 1st Street. The land is proposed for annexation with an R1 zoning designation. If annexation is approved, a 31-lot subdivision application will be considered by the city at the September Planning Commission meeting. When considering annexation, the Section 15005 of the Hermiston Code of Ordinances provides the requirements for annexation. The requirements for annexation as follows. The proposal is in conformance with all applicable state annexation law requirements. The property is contained within the urban portion of the urban growth boundary as identified in our comprehensive plan. The proposed zoning is consistent with the underlying comprehensive plan designation. Findings of fact are developed in support or denial of the annexation, and all city services can be readily extended, and the property owner is willing to bear costs associated with sewer, water, and roads. This land is located within the urban portion of the urban growth boundary and has a low-density residential comprehensive plan map designation, which corresponds to an R1 or R2 zoning designation. As noted above, the applicant is proposing annexation with an R1 designation. The general character of the area surrounding the property is low-density residential. There is a single-family subdivision to the north and west consisting of lots between 9,000 and 14,000 square feet. The land to the south and east is developed at rural residential density with larger ranchette development with single-family dwellings on roughly 2-acre lots. City services can be readily extended into the annexation area from their existing terminus at the north property line where Southwest 3rd Street enters into the property. According to staff, when we reviewed the proposal, all services are capable of serving any proposed development on the property. Testimony was received stating that the land is within the boundary of the Hermiston Irrigation District and that the land has 14 acres of water rights on it. And the district requests that the applicant work with the district to discuss fees and restrictions that are necessary for the preservation of the water rights. This time I'd be happy to answer any questions on the staff.
I had a question, Glenn. On page 67, under the requested action motion, the second item is motion to impose conditions of approval. Are there any conditions of approval?
There are not, but that is not to say that the planning commission would not have suggested conditions.
Any other questions for Glenn? Okay, we'll have testimony now, so is there someone who'd like to talk to this? Mr. Newman?
I'm Dave Lorenzen. I'm an engineer with CK3 Engineering. Our office is 945 West Orchard. As stated in the staff report, we're requesting annexation of 13.8 acres. It is in the urban growth boundary, and it is zoned L in the county, and which relates to R1 zoning. Complies with your zoning. We're proposing on developing 31 lots on this property. The client has been working with the Hermiston Irrigation District, and some of the larger lots will actually have irrigation rights. The lots we're proposing is a half acre to a third acre, and as Clint said, utilities are available on the north boundary and can be extended in. And I guess we're looking forward to developing this into a good, high-quality residential area for the city of Hermiston. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Commissioners, any questions? Phil?
So from what you just said, the housing, the new house, in the new housing development will be houses that are comparable in value to the ones that have already been built in the first part of the Burns edition, is that right?
They'll be comparable or even maybe a little bit larger lots.
Question about, is Burns Drive going to be continuing on into this and being developed, or is it all that going through Southwest Third?
That's part of the Maxwell Canal. Burns Drive will not be extended into the subdivision. There's a parcel there, that parcel 2000 is privately owned lot.
Burns Drive also is not actually a street. It is just a private driveway, essentially.
Any other questions? Commissioners? Thank you. Could I get you the microphone? Thank you. Is there someone else who'd like to speak to this?
Jeff Newman, 29411. I am the landowner of this property. Been farming it since 1990. lost control of farming this portion of 13 acres when Paul is in his final 1 or 2 phases of his Desert Sky development on the west side. Paul has 2 roads that come into the other portion of, I actually have 56 acres. I thought we were going to do annex all 56 acres into this city, but we'll have to discuss that. But right now, 13 acres, 14 acres to develop is, every lot is 13,000 square feet or larger. Up to, I've had interest of people wanting to put my half-acre lots into 1-acre lots. But we'll see how that progresses as this development proceeds. Any questions?
Any questions from Mr. Moon? Thank you. Did I get you the microphone? Thank you. Anyone else to speak for this? Does anyone want to speak against this? Commissioners, any questions? Ready to close the hearing? I close the hearing. Do I hear, we have findings of fact that have been drafted?
I move that we approve the findings of fact.
A motion to approve findings of fact. Do I have a second?
Second.
Motion a second on the table for approval of findings of fact as written. Any more discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Now we need a motion to recommend to City Council.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to recommend annexation to the City Council. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say no. Motion passes. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Now we go on to new business. So we have before us preliminary plat for Diamond Run subdivision. East diagonal, East Elm, and northeast 10th Street. With a substantial staff report. Clint, do you want to wade into this?
Yeah. Lloyd and Lawrence Pierce has submitted an application for a 150 lot subdivision located on recently purchased land on the north side of East Diagonal Boulevard, northeast 10th Street, and south of East Elm Avenue. The property itself contains multiple zoning designations. The majority of the property is zoned multifamily residential. There are also sections zoned NCO at the northwest corner and C2 on the east side of Diagonal. The proposed development encompasses several development types. The bulk of the development will contain conventional single-family lots. Residential lots will be about 137 lots designed to R3 zoning standards. There is a proposed dedication of 2.3 acres along Northeast 10th Street for pedestrian trail purposes. There is a 0.6 acre parcel which is proposed to be reserved as a private park for the residents of the development age 55 and older, and there is that 2 acre C2 on the east side of Diagonal Road, which is not really a part of the development plan at this time, but because it's all one lot, it's going to wind up being something else as part of the subdivision. The site is serviced by 3 roads: East Elm Avenue, East Diagonal Boulevard, and Northeast 10th Street. No street connections are proposed to Northeast 10th Street, which is a county road. East Elm Avenue is a state highway and will require approval from ODOT for the design of the new public street connection. Public streets don't require an access permit, but they do have to have their design approved. The scale of the development proposal and the condition of the road servicing the development necessitated the preparation of traffic impact analysis. Your packet has this traffic report and the city's analysis of the traffic report. And since the preparation of the staff report on August 5th, the applicant has submitted an additional traffic analysis, which is included in your supplemental packet, which you received today. This supplemental information objects to the need to designate a 4-way stop at 10th and Diagonal, and for the developer to contribute to the 4-way stop. After reviewing the information, the city agrees with the findings of the supplemental report and recommends removing the requirement to contribute 50% of the cost to creating a 4-way stop, but it still retains the recommendation that the city council commission a engineering review of the intersection for the need for installing stop signs. Our Hermiston TSP designates this intersection as one that will fall below mobility standards by 2033 and will need a signal or a roundabout. The staff report also discusses the impact of the development on Northeast 10th Street. In light of Supreme Court decisions regarding exactions on the development, the city finds that the impact of the development is not sufficient to be roughly proportional to the cost of rebuilding and improving Northeast 10th Street, but is proportional to the cost of installing a multi-use path on Northeast 10th Street. Thus, the staff report recommends that the developer bear the cost of aiding and improving a trail, which will significantly improve mobility and safety for multimodal transportation to and from the development, as well as local schools. The applicant requested some modification of the language of the trail condition, mainly working with the utility companies to develop a acceptable trail construction standard, because there are underlying utility easements in that area. There's underground power, and the amended language of that condition is in your packet. Improvements to Diagonal are required. The road is in sufficient condition to not require rebuilding of the pavement and base, but improvements to the pedestrian component of the Diagonal road frontage are going to be required. A strict reading of the city's requirement for street improvements requires curb, gutter, and sidewalk adjacent to the development. The applicant has proposed a multi-use path which matches the other 2 street frontages on East Elm and Northeast 10th Street, and as well as the existing path that's on the south side of Diagonal directly across from the development. Staff has prepared 2 conditions, the one in your first packet, which requires full improvement, and one in your supplemental packet, which requires a path to support the plan commission's decision. Basically, that's a discretionary decision on the part of the planning commission, what development standards you require on the street improvement. So you have conditions that can go either way depending on how the planning commission discussion goes. Lot restrictions are proposed regarding access to Elm and Diagonal to avoid the creation of double frontage lots, which is one of the requirements in our subdivision ordinance. The applicant requested that the condition in your staff report that says that the plat have a no access restriction to Elm and Diagonal be changed wording wise to say no direct access. And after discussion of the wording, it was agreed that the best solution would be to say no driveways are to be permitted onto Elm or Diagonal. Comments were received from the Confederated Tribes and from the Hermiston Irrigation District. The tribes requested that a pedestrian and subsurface archaeological survey be performed. After researching the requirements with council, the staff recommends that the requirement requested by the tribes not be imposed, but that the record reflect that the development is bound by the requirements of ORS 358 regarding discovery and preservation of archaeological art. The Irrigation District notes that there is a canal bounding the west property line, and that this canal is protected impacts of the development. Happy to go over any specific issues with those conditions. Based on the supplemental memo, which requested some conditions deleting, the total number of conditions will reduce to 19, and some of the language will be amended. In your supplemental memo from yesterday, each of the amended condition language is included with each item, so that as things have changed, such as the utility easement, construction says that applicant and city will work cooperatively with the underlying easement holders to establish an appropriate path service, which will be ADA compliant and comprised of asphalt, impervious pavement, and base rock. Those type of wordsmithing to the conditions are basically what's in your supplemental here. I'd be happy to go over anything else. This project has been a while in coming, and it's been through several reviews. The preliminary plat is prepared in accordance with all of our standards, and recommended approval at this time, subject to the amended conditions.
Anybody have questions for Clint? Joe?
So Clint, help me understand that Northeast 10th is a county road, and it will be sort of landlocked now, a county road within the city, because all these roads that are proposed in subdivision would be Hermiston roads, right? So that would be, is that something common?
It's actually very common.
Okay, and then the staff report, you originally had suggested city rebuilding Northeast 10th as a requirement for this subdivision, even though it isn't a city. So who has jurisdiction over this road?
It is a county road as far as maintenance and jurisdiction goes, but in our joint management agreement, we're always trying to get those roads changed to city jurisdiction. And the only way we will accept jurisdiction of those roads is when they meet a city standard. So if the paving is inadequate base, is inadequate width, is inadequate drainage, inadequate sidewalks, or whatever, those need to be improved before the city will accept jurisdiction over the road from them. For instance, West Highland, in front of the LDS Church and the RV Park and all that, we recently, about this time last year, took over jurisdiction of that from the county. That was 100% in city limits. Had been 100% in city limits for 10, 15 years. But the development along Highland, when the mini storage went in and everything, finally had enough curb, gutter, and sidewalk along those frontages that it met all of the criteria for transferring jurisdiction of that county road in the city limits to the city. And so, similarly with Northeast 10th Street, we have that identified in our transportation plan as a road that's going to need to be widened and rebuilt. And we are hoping at some point to get it included in the STIP, which is ODOT's statewide transportation improvement plan, possibly getting safe routes and school money, other sources in our capital improvement plan related to the gas taxes, where that road will eventually
Any other questions? Mr. Piercy, do you want to talk to this?
Well, I'm Lloyd Piercy.
Yeah, come up to the mic, Lloyd. Next one, please.
I'm Lloyd Piercy, and my wife and I are the ones that have been working on this project. And we brought our whole team here so they can answer any questions you might have. And we have Aaron's going to offer, the engineer's going to offer an explanation and answer any questions that you might have. So, thank you.
My name is Aaron Hoff. I'm with ACH Engineering, designing preliminary plat. I'm going to be very brief. You guys have been here a long time. We've read the conditions that Clint has suggested, and with the addendum, team. I'm here to answer any questions you may have.
Anybody have questions?
Yeah,
Phil?
So I'm curious, can you explain what was the rationale behind the area that's designated 55 and over? Its placement and what went with that, the park?
Well, there was a couple different iterations we went through. Basically, the 55 and older, we wanted them to have a little bit of segregation and for them to have their own place for them to be without having too many of the other public in there. I don't know the proper way to say that, but basically a park for them and their friends to be without youngsters raising Cain, I guess would be the nicest way to put that. So that's why they're kind of segregated and where they are where they are, plus they get easy access in and out of the subdivision without having to always traverse all the way through the development to get to the main road.
So is the park going to then be limited only, the park that's in the center, going to be limited only to the residents of those lots that surround it?
Yes.
And would grandkids be eliminated then? Because
I don't anticipate that to be eliminated. I think they would have to be accompanied by one of the members of that community or one of the owners of those lots, however they choose to live.
So you'd have rules, there'll be rules associated with the use of each of the parks?
Yeah, and there'll be covenants and restrictions that come with the development.
Any more questions?
The walking path that you guys are proposing along Diagonal, is that going to be outside the lots that border Diagonal, or is that going to be within the subdivision itself?
Yeah, the one on Diagonal will be in the current city right away. It will just be in between the edge of pavement and the property lines. So it will be completely within the city right away. It will be segregated from the edge of pavement. That way it's more like the rest of the development in the area. Plus it's nicer if you're walking to not necessarily be right next to the road where it's nice to stagger off.
And that'll be kind of in lieu of those sidewalks and gutters.
Correct.
I have a question for, concerning the NCO lots. You have 13 NCO lots. Which lots are those exactly? I think I know, I just want to make sure.
They border or back up to Umatilla Electric Substation.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the only ones that there are.
So they would have a walking path behind each of those lots, then access to park access easement?
No. Those lots do not have the walking path behind them. There's, let me grab my
Those access easement would be utility?
Yeah, the thought is that these lots may possibly have businesses below, residents above, some combination of that. With the access behind, hopefully that they would be parking behind and have their commercial front towards the front road. So that's why that easement is there, is for them to have access.
So would that easement have access onto Elm Street and 10th Street?
The way we have it, yes, that is true.
So that area on the top of the map, on the top left, where the lots are identified, that's not just the UEC property then?
The rectangle piece that's above where all the text is, that's UEC property. As soon as you're off of that, then you're on the property of this development. Did I answer that correctly? Is that the question?
So just to clarify again, with being
second. So then this easement will go off into Elm, as it's drawn here. Is that your intention, or is it not?
Yes, right now, that easement touches 10th and Elm, if they choose to use that. This is set up to leave all options open for this development, so we're not trying to restrict it at this time. And that way, however the development moves forward, we have access. So that's why.
But that would be pedestrian access only onto the trails on Elm and 10th, not vehicular access. I think is where the planning commission is going.
You're correct. The vehicular access comes off of Emerald Drive and can come in, but they aren't planned to have vehicular access onto 10th and Elm. Sorry about that.
Okay. So there's this 20-foot park access easement. That's not going to be a paved access easement for cars? It's just pedestrian?
Which lots are you talking about?
Are we talking about the lots basically surrounding the UEC section? You have the 20-foot park access easement?
Yes, the park access easement means the NCO park, probably bad term of words, but it's to access the NCO properties.
But it's not going to access Elm?
Not driven wise, not traffic wise.
No vehicular access.
Correct.
It's really important to help to visualize that the white area where the text is, where it says NCO lots, 55 and over, general lots, all that area. The substation that UEC and HES jointly own only encompasses about a third of the lot, and we're in negotiations as a city to develop a specific park on the undeveloped area closer to 10th Street. So that's why they're calling it a park access.
Yeah. But I wanted to make sure that that was, whether or not that there was vehicular access on that. Because otherwise, if it is, then you have access to 10th Street. You're saying in the traffic analysis, there is no 10th Street.
Yeah, and the state doesn't allow us to have another access on the Elm.
Yeah.
So, sorry about not being clear over there.
So, Clint, this park, since it's not being dedicated to the public, then would not, I assume, trigger the stuff we were talking about earlier with the temporary homeless 1,000-foot temporary homeless shelter?
The park, the Doran Park, will actually be dedicated to the public. It will be a city park.
The one in the, that's the one though in the UEC?
Yeah. But I think that the 55 and older one, no, I don't think that would, because we specifically called out a public park in our recommendation. That's a private park in this case. And lot 150, where the trail is, will eventually be a city lot as well. So all of the trail along 10th Street would also be considered a public park at that point.
You mentioned the walking path along diagonal. The path is further back towards the property line, so you're not walking right against the street.
Correct.
What is the ground covering going to look like in between the walking path and the road? Is that just...
It will be improved because that's going to handle the stormwater runoff. So it'll be a grass swell.
A grass swell, and then who maintains that? Is that part of the HOA's responsibilities or each individual property owner?
Inside the right of way, that is city.
That's city, okay.
City, yeah. And once we're in the development, then each individual lot owner maintains directly in front of his or her home, but on Elm and also on Diagonal, then that's outside of the development. So
Got it.
that would be city or state.
Clint, city hasn't yet taken on grass mowing responsibilities of these swales. What's the city's take on this?
Yes, we have taken it on. I think that there may be a lag in how often the Parks Department gets to it, but we have taken it on. What we tried to do, I was actually talking with our street superintendent, Ron, about this. Tries to contract with the county to come in and spray it with weed killer about twice a year. And then we can go in and use a weed eater on it. At least that's what they're trying to do on the island with the trail there.
But they're proposing and putting in grass. I don't think we want to spray it.
We would not want grass. We would want it to be a more native vegetation, just because, yeah, we wouldn't have the ability to mow it as
And that's definitely something we'll work through during the design phase, because there'll be cross sections and we'll call out exactly what the city would like us to put in there.
I know you guys don't have it here in phases, but I'm assuming you're not going to build another 47 or 48 lots all in one go. So where are you planning to start in this development?
They actually are planning to build it all
In
one time.
go.
Yep, they get better cost savings to do it all at one time versus staggering it out. So that's what's planned.
Have the utilities given you any indication when they might get back to you on that lot 150 as far as what type of a surface you can use for your walkway? Do you have any idea when they're gonna?
I expect it to match what we're doing on diagonal. I expect it to be an asphalt pad. We've done that in other places that have these electrical jurisdictions, and it's always been accepted. And actually, they use it to drive their trucks on when they need to get in there. So they're typically very happy to have that. So that's what I'm anticipating.
The HES superintendent and I contacted UEC on Monday, and UEC it preliminarily has support for asphalt.
If I remember correctly, when you first approached us about this, you had an intent to place manufactured homes primarily in this. Is that still the plan? Or maybe I'm not remembering correctly.
Excuse me, that's never been our plan.
Oh, really? So these are going to be stick-built houses on site?
That's our plan. They'll meet city code, whatever kind of houses they are.
There are manufactured homes going in further to the west on diagonal. That might be what.
Oh, those two. Right. Okay.
Any more questions? Are we ready to look at findings of fact? Thank you. If I could get you to clean up the white mic and the dais, thank you. Forgot to have light in it. I figured you guys have been working together anyways.
I would move that we approve the findings of that.
Second.
You have a motion to approve the findings of fact. Been seconded as written. Any discussion? I had a question, Clint. Should there be something in the introduction talking about where their findings as written says no statistically significant trips forecast on segment of Northeast County bus property? We need to amend that a little bit with the analysis of the traffic analysis, stating that there would be significant pedestrian trips. Or are we just discussing vehicular
If anything, we could say no statistically significant vehicular trips are proposed. Because the trail winds up being its own analysis as a separate issue.
Any other further questions, discussion on findings? All those in favor say aye. All opposed? Motion passes. Now we have conditions. Okay, let's take a look at the conditions. So Clint, you are proposing to amend the conditions as it was originally written, but those that were provided tonight?
And looking at it now, if I were doing this differently, I would not have done each one as an A, which makes it absolutely impossible to tell which condition is replacing which. But, whatever, it always helps to have good help. And so, condition 2 is being amended to state applicant shall improve lot 150 with a 8-foot wide multi-use path from the intersection of East Diagonal north to the north boundary of lot 150. Applicant and city will work cooperatively with the underlying easement holders within lot 150 to establish an appropriate path surface. Path shall be ADA compliant and comprised of asphalt, impervious pavement, and base rock in compliance with public works standards. Improvement of the multi-use path shall be concurrent with installation of improvements and completed prior to approval of the final plat. Condition 3 would be amended to state East Diagonal Boulevard shall be improved with an 8-foot wide asphalt multi-use path and drainage improvements. A new center turn pocket shall be constructed to provide safe turning movements from Diagonal Boulevard onto Northeast 11th Street. Condition 10 would be amended to state the city will prohibit the outdoor storage of hazardous chemicals and the underground storage of gasoline and diesel fuels in the subdivision at issue, except on lot 149, which is the C2 lot on the east side of Diagonal. That's not part of this. Condition 12 is deleted, and Commission 11 is amended to state the city will commission an engineering study to consider the warrant and need for installation of a four-way stop at the intersection of Northeast 10th Street and East Diagonal Boulevard. Condition 14 is amended to state a notation shall be placed on the final plat prohibiting driveways onto East Elm Avenue for lots 60 through 66 and lots 124 through 130. And 15 is amended to state a notation shall be placed on the final plat prohibiting driveways onto East Diagonal Boulevard for lots 1 through 8 and lots 130 through 147. And condition 21 is recommended to be deleted.
Do we want to do, I know in the past we've done like a 1-foot setback or something along roads where we don't want access so that people don't put a gate on their back fence and then go out or back an RV into their driveway in their backyard.
We kind of talked back and forth on that as staff, and we haven't been consistent on whether we've done the 1-foot no access easement or just the plat notation. I'm actually more comfortable with the plat notation than I am with the 1-foot no access easement, especially in this case, because being bounded entirely by multi-use paths, having a no access easement would be discouraging of like a backyard gate, which actually is very desirable in a situation like this. So I prefer to keep it with the no driveways so that pedestrian access is still allowed and even, encouraged.
Okay, that's pedestrian.
Glenn, is there any reason that you didn't use the same language about the path for condition 3 that you did in condition 2 regarding both timing and ADA compliance, etc.?
Yes, the reason that I didn't is because we were concerned on the multi-use path on lot 150 that should the underlying easement holders go, well, we absolutely don't want that paved, we only want bark dust, you know, would that be ADA compatible? No. And so we wanted to make sure whatever went down on that particular thing where you had the utility easements that had to be respected, we wanted that to be specified that that is an ADA, it needs to be an ADA compliant improvement. When it comes to diagonal improvements, because that's a city improvement in a city right away, it's going to be ADA compatible. Period. There's no way around it. We're going to review it for its slope and its cross slope, and you know it's not going to be able to be more than 5% of grade at any point, and it's going to be a hard surface no matter what.
And the timing will be concurrent with what's the acceptance of the final plat?
Yeah, that's always the case when it's a public right of way improvement.
So do we have a motion to approve the preliminary plat with the amended conditions?
So moved.
With amendments as per Clint.
Second.
So we have a motion and a second to approve preliminary plat subject to conditions as written except for condition 2 has been amended, condition 3 is amended, 10 and 11 are amended, 12 is deleted, 14 and 15 are amended, and 21 is deleted. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Then you'll renumber number 13 on Langston.
So, okay, with 12 deleted, everything else is renumbered. That's correct. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. Motion passes. Thank you, Mr. Piercy.
Thank you.
Now we're on to unfinished business.
We have no unfinished business.
Seeing none, we go to planner comments.
We're in for a few busy months. I just want to make the planning commission aware that the entire September agenda is things that we had to melt from the August. So, we're really busy right now.
Yeah.
Well, partition, subdivision, all could have been accommodated this month. I think that's all. So, it'll all be plats next month.
No more legislative amendments for us to vote?
Those are so much fun. No, not right now.
Anybody have any secrets they wish to divulge? Anything good for the order?
Fair's going on.
Fair's going on. Okay, it's 11 minutes after 10. They always likes to put it 10.
Can you make sure these people that are gonna be at the right next month, get their materials in on time, so you're not having to scramble on the last day to get all this stuff put together, and we don't have a chance to.
I know.
Yeah, it's really tough trying to keep up with stuff.
You know, and I've seen some other cities that actually close their written comment submissions a week ahead of the day. We've always taken them up to the day of the hearing, and not all cities do that. I was actually kind of surprised when I read some of the public notices.
Even if it was just a couple of days, you could email us.
Yeah.
That would give us some time.
Today I had to write 2 pages of findings between 8 a.m. and noon. Can't get them out any quicker than that.
Okay, anybody have any